They thought I'd stay silent. They thought I'd swallow the humiliation, bow my head, and disappear from their game. But while the CEO and his wife celebrated stealing my work in front of the board, they had no idea I'd already set a legal trap signed, sealed, and unbreakable. One missing signature, one overlooked clause, and their entire $82 million media empire would crumble before their eyes. My name is Emma Kane, and at 34, I was the invisible architect behind Aurora Media's most ambitious project, a streaming platform that would revolutionize content distribution across 3 continents. For 18 months, I'd lived in server rooms and conference calls, building the core logic that would handle everything from encrypted payment processing to real-time content delivery across 47 countries. The code was elegant, bulletproof, and entirely mine. The strategy meeting that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I'd just finished a 72-hour sprint debugging the API authentication system when Marissa Hale swept into the boardroom wearing a cream Chanel suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She'd been appointed creative director 6 weeks earlier, a title invented specifically for the CEO's wife, complete with a corner office she visited twice a week, and a salary that made the CFO's eye twitch. I watched from my seat at the far end of the table as Marissa opened her MacBook and pulled up my architecture diagrams, my logic flows, my security protocols. She'd changed the color scheme from my functional blue and white to some gaudy purple gradient, added her name to the footer, and was now presenting 18 months of my work as the creative team's innovative approach to digital infrastructure. As you can see, Marissa gestured at the screen with perfectly manicured nails. We've developed a proprietary distribution logic that will give Aurora Media unprecedented control over content monetization. The word hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. I felt my jaw clench as she butchered the technical explanation, confusing load balancing with bandwidth throttling, mixing up encryption protocols with compression algorithms. The board members nodded along, impressed by buzzwords they didn't understand, delivered by a woman who understood them even less. Graham Hale, our CEO and Marissa's husband, beamed with pride from the head of the table. "Brilliant work, darling," he said, not even attempting to hide the nepotism. "This is exactly the kind of innovation that justifies our $82 million valuation." I should have spoken up, should have stood and claimed my work. But I'd learned something in my decade in tech: the spouse of a CEO doesn't steal credit accidentally. This was calculated, deliberate, a power play designed to push me out once the project launched. The meeting ended at 6:30 p.m., and we all filed into the executive lounge for the obligatory cocktail celebration. Graham raised his champagne glass, his wedding ring catching the light as he toasted, "The creative team that's revolutionizing digital media." Not a single mention of engineering, not a whisper of my name. Marissa's eyes found mine across the room. She smiled a predator's smile, all teeth and triumph. She knew exactly what she'd done. More importantly, she knew I knew, and she was daring me to do something about it. "Emma," she called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "be a dear and make sure the tech team implements everything correctly. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings about the vision." The room chuckled. The CEO's wife had just publicly reduced me from architect to implementer, from creator to secretary. I smiled back, raised my glass of water in a mock toast, and made a decision that would destroy everything they'd built on my foundation. They thought they were predators and I was prey. They had no idea they'd just declared war on someone who knew every line of code, every security protocol, and most importantly, every legal loophole in the system I'd helped design. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anger. Anger was wasteful. I lay in bed until 3:45 a.m., thinking about a compliance meeting from 8 months ago that everyone else had forgotten. I'd been tasked with drafting the internal IP protection framework, a mind-numbing document that most executives signed without reading. But I'd read every word. Hell, I'd written every word. The memory crystallized conference room B, a Wednesday morning. Coffee getting cold while the legal team droned on about intellectual property. I'd insisted on adding Clause 6.4b, a seemingly minor provision that required explicit written authorization from any engineer before their proprietary code could be used in commercial deployment. The lawyers had loved it. It protected the company from contractors claiming ownership. The board had approved it without discussion. Graham had signed it while checking his phone. They'd never imagined it could be used against them. I drove to the office at 4:30 a.m. the next morning. The building was empty except for security guards who knew me as the engineer who practically lived there. I badged in, made myself a coffee, and got to work on something that would look like routine maintenance to anyone watching. Every function I'd written, every algorithm I'd optimized, every security protocol I'd designed, I tagged them all with the IP-sensitive marker in our version control system. The beauty was that this wasn't sabotage. This was following company protocol to the letter. The system would automatically lock any commercial deployment of tagged code without proper authorization, just as Clause 6.4b required. The Git commits looked innocuous. Updated documentation for compliance. Added IP tags per legal requirements. Routine security audit adjustments. Boring, bureaucratic housekeeping that no one would ever review. Marissa certainly wouldn't. She didn't even know how to access the repository. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the perfect employee. I attended every meeting, implemented Marissa's ridiculous UI changes, smiled when she mispronounced API as API instead of saying it as a word. I even offered to help with her presentation for the board, which she declined with a patronizing pat on my shoulder. Technical details are so boring. Emma, leave the vision to those of us who understand the bigger picture. I documented everything, every email where she claimed credit, every meeting where she presented my work, every timestamp showing who actually wrote the code. The digital trail was perfect, indisputable, and legally admissible. The CTO, Marcus Rodriguez, noticed me working late one evening and stopped by my desk. "You're putting in serious hours for someone who got completely shafted in that board meeting," he said quietly. I looked up from my screen, keeping my expression neutral. "Just making sure everything's properly documented. Compliance has been on everyone about IP protection lately." He frowned, probably remembering the memo about Clause 6.4b that had circulated months ago. "Right. The authorization protocols." He paused, studying my face. "Emma, is there something I should know?" "You should know that every piece of critical infrastructure has been properly tagged according to company policy," I said. "And you should know that I take intellectual property very seriously." Marcus stood there for a long moment, processing the implications. He was smart enough to understand what I hadn't said, smart enough to realize that an $82 million launch depended on code that was now legally locked behind my signature. "Does Graham know?" he asked. "Graham knows what Marissa tells him," I replied, "and Marissa knows what she thinks she knows." Marcus walked away without another word. He wouldn't warn them not out of loyalty to me, but out of self-preservation. When this exploded, he wanted to be on record as having followed proper procedures. The trap was set. Every line of code was tagged. Every legal requirement was documented. The system would enforce the very rules they'd approved and forgotten. All I had to do now was wait and let their own arrogance pull the trigger. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Thursday, live streamed to investors across the globe. Aurora Media had rented the grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, complete with a stage that looked like a Tesla product launch. The production cost alone was north of $200,000, Graham's way of showing the world that Aurora had already won the streaming wars before firing a single shot. I stood in the back row, invisible among the junior developers and support staff. We were the furniture, present but unnoticed, while the real show happened on stage. Marissa emerged from the wings in a silver Oscar de la Renta dress that shimmered under the lights, her blonde hair styled to perfection. She looked like what she was trying to be, the visionary tech executive's wife who was also, conveniently, a visionary herself. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice carrying the practiced confidence of someone who'd hired a speaking coach. "Today, Aurora Media isn't just launching a platform, We're launching a revolution in content distribution. The slides behind her displayed my architecture diagrams, now branded with Aurora's purple gradient and her name in bold letters at the bottom. She walked through her innovation with rehearsed precision, using terms she'd memorized but didn't understand. When she said blockchain integration, I saw 3 engineers in my row exchange glances. We didn't have blockchain integration. She'd misread blockchain processing from my load balancing documentation. This proprietary logic, she continued, gesturing at a flowchart that had taken me 3 weeks to perfect, was developed under my direct supervision by the creative team I personally assembled. The camera operator panned across the audience. For a brief moment, I was on screen, a blurred figure in the back, nameless and irrelevant. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I simply existed in that space, watching her dig her own grave with a silver shovel. My phone vibrated. A text from Nora, my closest ally in the engineering department. She's using your exact code in the demo, not even modified. Check the staging server. I pulled out my laptop and connected to the staging environment. Sure enough, they were running my raw code for the live demonstration. Every function, every variable name, every comment I'd left in the margins. They hadn't even bothered to obfuscate it. Why would they? In their minds, they owned it. Another text from Nora. Legal flagged something in the compliance system. Big red warnings about IP authorization. Want me to check? No, I typed back. Let it run. On stage, Marissa was taking questions from tech journalists. Someone from TechCrunch asked about the technical specifications, and she deflected with practiced ease. We're keeping some of our secret sauce proprietary for competitive reasons, but I can assure you it's revolutionary. Secret sauce. My 18 months of 100-hour weeks reduced to condiment metaphors. The Wall Street Journal reporter asked about the development team. Marissa's smile never wavered. We have the best engineers in Silicon Valley implementing our vision. But the real innovation comes from thinking outside the traditional tech box. That's what my creative leadership brings to Aurora. Graham joined her on stage for the closing remarks, wrapping his arm around her waist as the cameras clicked. My wife has transformed how we think about technology at Aurora, he announced. Her creative vision paired with our technical execution is what makes this $82 million valuation conservative. The audience applauded. Investors nodded approvingly. The stock price ticker on the side screen showed Aurora up 12% in after-hours trading. I closed my laptop and walked out before the champagne toast, in the parking garage. I sat in my car and pulled up the compliance system on my phone. 17 alerts were flashing red. Each one was an automated warning about unauthorized commercial use of IP-sensitive code. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect intellectual property from theft. Even if the theft was being committed by the CEO's wife on national television. My phone rang. Marcus, the CTO. Emma, we have a problem with the staging environment. Some kind of lock on the production build. That's not a problem, I said, starting my car. That's the system working as designed. Check clause 6.4b if you're confused. The silence on the other end stretched for 5 long seconds. Jesus Christ, Emma. No, I said, pulling out of the parking space. Just contract law. 7 days before the $82 million launch, the staging environment started throwing errors like a machine gun spitting bullets. The first alert came at 6:23 a.m. On a Monday, the video distribution API was refusing to sync. By 7 a.m., the advertising data was duplicating itself in infinite loops. By 8:15 a.m., the entire billing system had locked itself behind a security token mismatch that no one could resolve. Marissa's assistant called me 9 times before I answered. Mrs. Hale needs you in the war room immediately, she said, her voice pitched with barely controlled panic. The war room was what Graham called Conference Room A when things went wrong. I took my time getting there, stopping for coffee, checking my email, letting them marinate in their own fear. When I finally walked in at 9:45 a.m., the scene was barely controlled chaos. Marissa stood at the whiteboard, her usually perfect appearance cracking at the edges, mascara slightly smudged. blazer thrown over a chair, her voice sharp as she barked at 3 senior engineers. Graham paced by the windows, his phone pressed to his ear, presumably reassuring investors that everything was under control. The CTO, Marcus, sat at the table with his laptop, his expression carved from stone. "Emma," Marissa spun toward me. "Finally fix this mess your team created." "What mess?" I asked, settling into a chair with my coffee. "The entire system is locked." She gestured wildly at the error logs projected on the screen. "Nothing works. The launch is in 7 days, and nothing works." I studied the errors with theatrical concentration. "Looks like IP-sensitive code is being blocked from commercial deployment. That's not a bug. That's a feature." Graham ended his call and turned to me. "What do you mean, a feature?" "Clause 6.4b of our internal compliance framework," I said calmly. "Any code tagged as IP-sensitive requires written authorization from the original author before commercial deployment. It's been company policy for 8 months." The room went silent. Marcus wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. He'd figured this out days ago and chosen to stay quiet. "That's ridiculous," Marissa snapped. "I authorized all of this. I'm the creative director." "You authorized the creative vision," I corrected. "But you're not the code author. The system tracks that automatically through our Git commits. Every function, every algorithm, every security protocol knows exactly who wrote it." Graham's face was turning an interesting shade of red. "So get the authorizations." "From whom?" I asked innocently. "Who wrote the code?" Marissa grabbed her laptop and pulled up the Git history. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with surprising competence. She'd been learning just enough to be dangerous. The commit history filled the screen. Emma Kane, Emma Kane, Emma Kane. Thousands of commits over 18 months. Her name appeared exactly 0 times. "This is extortion," Graham said quietly, his CEO voice dropping to a dangerous register. "This is compliance," I countered. "The same compliance you signed off on. The same policy the board approved to protect Aurora's intellectual property. I'm simply following the rules." An engineer I didn't recognize spoke up from the corner. "Can't we just remove the tags?" Marcus finally spoke. "That would require admin access to the version control system. Guess who has the only admin credentials for IP-sensitive code?" Everyone turned to look at me. "I'll be happy to discuss authorization," I said, standing up. "But first, we should probably address the small matter of creative director Hale presenting my work as her own to national media. My lawyer suggests that could complicate any authorization agreement." "Your lawyers," Marissa's voice cracked. I smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Did you think I wouldn't protect myself every presentation where you claimed credit, every email where you called it your innovation? Every public statement taking ownership of code you can't even read, it's all documented." The room erupted. Engineers scattered like roaches when the light turns on. Someone whispered, "She kept receipts." Another muttered, "We're so fucked." Graham grabbed Marissa's arm and steered her toward the door. "Legal, now." As they left, Marcus remained seated, staring at his laptop screen. "You know they'll destroy you for this." "No," I said, finishing my coffee. "They'll destroy themselves. I'm just making sure the infrastructure is working as designed." The internal emails started flying within minutes. Compliance was in panic mode. Legal was in damage control mode. The board was in what the fuck is happening mode. And somewhere in the building, Marissa Hale was learning that stealing credit was easy, but stealing code was impossible when the system was designed to prevent exactly that. Tuesday morning at 9:12 a.m., I received an email that had been CC'd to what looked like half the company. The subject line was clinical, REIP authorization request, urgent response required. The sender was Janet Kowalski, Aurora's chief legal counsel, and the recipient list included Graham, Marissa, the entire board of directors, and mysteriously, the heads of 3 major investment firms. "Ms. Kane," the email began, "we need to confirm your authorization signature for proprietary logic components XYZ47 through XYZ512 before Friday's commercial deployment. Please respond immediately. I typed 3 words, authorization not granted. My phone rang within 90 seconds. Janet's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear the strain underneath. Emma, we need to discuss this in person. Can you come to the executive conference room? I'm working from home today, I lied, sitting in my cubicle. But I'm happy to clarify via email. No authorization has been or will be granted for commercial use of my code without proper acknowledgement and compensation. Emma, please, this is bigger than... I hung up. The executive conference room was apparently in full meltdown mode. According to Nora's text updates, she'd been called in as a technical witness and was live texting me from under the table. Graham just threw a coffee mug, actual ceramic shattered. Marissa crying, makeup running, saying you sabotaged her. Board member just asked who the fuck authorized the press conference without confirming code ownership. Holy shit, someone just mentioned criminal charges for IP theft. At 10:45, I received a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from Carl Patterson, the board's senior technology advisor and someone I'd always respected. His voice was measured, careful. Emma, it's Carl. I've reviewed the documentation, the Git commits, the compliance framework. I need you to know that some of us on the board were unaware of recent developments. Please call me back. I didn't call back. Instead, I pulled up the email chain from March where Marissa had explicitly claimed authorship of her team's innovative solutions and forwarded it to Carl with a single question. Were you also unaware of this? The legal department's paralegal, Tim, someone I'd shared lunch with dozens of times, stopped by my desk around noon. He looked like he'd aged 5 years since morning. Emma, he whispered, glancing around nervously. Janet wants to know if you'd consider a settlement. For what? I asked loudly, making several nearby heads turn. I haven't done anything that requires settling. I've simply declined to authorize use of my intellectual property. That's my right under Clause 6.4b. But the launch is not my problem. I'm not the one who announced an $82 million valuation based on stolen code. Tim scurried away like his shoes were on fire. At 2:15 p.m., the board convened an emergency session. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. The walls in our building were thin, and voices carried when people shouted, and they were definitely shouting. Carl's voice cut through clearest. You authorized a massive commercial launch without verifying code ownership. Are you insane? Graham's response was muffled, but the word wife featured prominently. Then, clear as day, board member Patricia Williams, former federal prosecutor, current corporate validator, spoke with icy precision. Mr. Hale, your wife claimed authorship of code she didn't write. She presented it to media as her innovation. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is fraud. The F-word fraud hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My computer pinged with a new email, this time from the entire board. The subject line, Request for Emergency Meeting, Emma Kane. The body was brief. Ms. Kane, the board requests your immediate presence to discuss resolution of the current authorization situation. Your insights are critical to moving forward. I responded within a minute. I'll be available Thursday at 3 p.m. Please have all documentation regarding the attribution of proprietary logic ready for review, including press releases, public statements, and internal communications where ownership was claimed by non-authoring parties. Then I added one more line, my legal counsel will be present. I didn't have legal counsel yet, but I would by Thursday, and they would be very, very interested in a case involving $82 million worth of stolen intellectual property, presented to the world as someone else's innovation. My phone buzzed with another text from Nora. Marissa just ran out crying. Graham called her a fucking liability. This is better than Netflix. I pulled up my code editor and continued working on a small side project. The building could burn around me, but I had work to do. My own work, with my own name on it. Thursday's board meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m., but I arrived at 3:07 p.m. with David Steinberg. a corporate litigation attorney who'd made his reputation dismantling tech companies that played fast and loose with IP law. He'd taken my case on contingency after reviewing the documentation for exactly 12 minutes. The boardroom was full. Graham sat at the head of the table, his usual CEO swagger replaced by something that looked like barely controlled rage. Marissa was notably absent. The board members were arranged like a tribunal. Patricia Williams, Carl Patterson, James Morrison from the venture capital firm, and 4 others whose expressions ranged from furious to disgusted. Carl placed a thick folder in the center of the table. This is every piece of documentation regarding the Aurora Media platform development. We've spent 48 hours reviewing it. He looked directly at Graham. It's damning. Patricia Williams opened her laptop and turned it toward the room. The screen showed a compilation video: Marissa at the press conference, Marissa in interviews, Marissa on Bloomberg, claiming to have revolutionized content distribution through innovative creative leadership. In 17 separate public statements, Patricia said, Mrs. Hale claimed authorship of code she never wrote. Meanwhile, she clicked to another screen. Ms. Kane's Git commits show 37,000 lines of code over 18 months. Mrs. Hale's commits show 0. Graham tried to interrupt. Marissa was providing creative oversight. Stop. James Morrison's voice could have frozen water. We've seen the emails where she explicitly claimed to have developed the logic. That's not oversight. That's fraud. David, my lawyer, finally spoke. My client is prepared to authorize the code for commercial use under specific conditions. The room leaned forward collectively. First, David continued, immediate public correction of all false attribution. Aurora Media will issue a press release acknowledging Emma Kane as the sole architect of the platform's core logic. Graham's face went purple. That would destroy our credibility. You destroyed your own credibility, Carl interrupted. Continue, Miss Steinberg. Second, Ms. Kane receives proper compensation. Given that the entire $82 million valuation is based on her code, we're seeking 4% equity, fully vested immediately. Someone gasped. 4% of $82 million was over $3 million. Third, David wasn't done. Mrs. Marissa Hale will resign from her position as creative director, effective immediately. You can't, Graham started to stand. Yes, we can, Patricia said coldly. In fact, the board has already voted. Either we meet these terms, or we cancel the launch and face investor lawsuits that will bankrupt Aurora within 6 months. Carl pulled out another document. There's more. The 3 major investors have been notified of the situation. They're demanding an emergency audit. If we can't prove clear code ownership by tomorrow at noon, they're pulling out. That's $60 million in funding. Gone. The board member I didn't recognize, an older woman with steel-gray hair, spoke for the first time. Mr. Hale, your wife didn't just steal code. She exposed this entire company to catastrophic legal liability. The fact that she's your wife makes this worse, not better. Graham's hands were shaking. This is extortion. No, I said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. Extortion is taking someone's work and claiming it as your own. Extortion is standing on a stage in a $5,000 dress, built on code you can't even read, and calling yourself an innovator. What this is consequence. Patricia Williams pulled out a prepared authorization agreement. Ms. Kane, if you sign this, granting Aurora the rights to use your code, will meet all 3 conditions. The press release will go out within the hour. The equity transfer will be processed immediately, and Mrs. Hale's resignation will be announced tomorrow morning. I looked at the agreement. David had already reviewed a draft. Everything was their acknowledgement, compensation, and the complete professional destruction of Marissa Hale. There's one more thing, I said. I want it in writing that Marissa Hale can never work for Aurora Media or any of its subsidiaries again, ever. Graham's face went from purple to white. She's my wife. She was your creative director, Carl corrected, and she committed fraud using company resources. Be grateful we're not pressing criminal charges. I signed the agreement at 3:42 p.m. By 4 p.m., The press release was being drafted. By 4:30 p.m., my equity was being processed, and somewhere in the building, Marissa Hale was packing up her corner office, her creative vision reduced to what it had always been, someone else's work wrapped in a designer dress. The board filed out slowly, each member avoiding Graham's eyes. Carl stopped beside me on his way out. "You know, Emma, we're going to need a new CTO soon." I smiled. "I know." Friday morning, launch day. The live stream was scheduled for noon Pacific time, with tech journalists from 40 countries logged in to witness Aurora Media's revolutionary platform debut. Except at 11:20 a.m., everything went dark. The marketing team killed the stream. The PR department went into lockdown. The investor relations hotline was redirected to a pre-recorded message about technical adjustments. The $82 million launch that was supposed to change digital media forever died with a whimper, not a bang. I watched it all unfold from my local coffee shop, laptop open to multiple news sites, refreshing every few seconds as the story exploded across the internet. TechCrunch broke it first at 11:35 a.m. Aurora Media pulls plug on major launch amid executive scandal. Bloomberg followed 3 minutes later. Aurora Media CEO's wife resigns after IP theft allegations. By noon, when the launch should have been happening, CNBC had the full story. Aurora Media's $82 million valuation in jeopardy as board confirms fraud by creative director Marissa Hale. The hashtag started trending within minutes. #MarissaGate, #Aurora Scandal, #Code Theft. Twitter was having a field day with memes about creative directors who couldn't create anything. Someone leaked a photo of Marissa's silver Oscar de la Renta dress from the press conference with the caption, $80,000 dress, 0 lines of code. My phone buzzed constantly. Reporters wanted statements. Competitors wanted to hire me. Nora sent a play-by-play from inside the building. Security just escorted Marissa out. She had 2 banker's boxes and mascara all over her face. The real bloodbath started at 12:45 p.m. When the markets reacted. Aurora's stock price, which had been climbing steadily in anticipation of the launch, crashed 47% in 3 hours. $8 billion in market cap, evaporated. The Wall Street Journal published a brutal analysis at 2 p.m. Aurora Media's failure isn't just about stolen code, it's about a corporate culture that prioritized nepotism over competence, style over substance, and connections over capability. Patricia Williams, the board member and former prosecutor, gave exactly one quote to Reuters. "The board has taken decisive action to address governance failures. Graham Hale's status as CEO is under immediate review." Translation: Graham was done. At 3:15 p.m., someone leaked internal emails to Gawker. The worst one was from Marissa to Graham, sent 3 months ago. "Emma won't be a problem once the launch is successful. Tech people are replaceable. Vision is not." The internet's response was swift and merciless. Replaceable. Marissa started trending. Someone found her LinkedIn where she'd already updated her title from creative director at Aurora Media to innovation consultant. The comment section was a massacre. Marcus, the CTO, called me at 4 p.m. "Emma, we need you back. The board wants to salvage something from this mess. They're offering you CTO." "Not interested," I said, watching a particularly brutal CNN segment about corporate fraud in Silicon Valley. "Name your price." "There is no price. I'm done with Aurora." "Emma, please." "Marcus, the company just lost half its value because the CEO let his wife play executive with other people's work. Why would I go back to that?" He didn't have an answer. By 5 p.m., 3 major investors had officially pulled out. $60 million in committed funding. Gone. The secondary launch scheduled for the European market was canceled indefinitely. Partnership deals with Disney and Netflix were under review, which everyone knew meant dead. Graham released a statement at 6 p.m., clearly written by lawyers. Aurora Media acknowledges errors in attribution and is committed to maintaining the highest standards of intellectual property protection going forward. No apology, no admission of what really happened, just corporate speak for "we got caught." Marissa stayed completely silent. Her social media accounts went dark. Her personal website, where she described herself as a technical visionary, was deleted. The Women in Tech conference, where she was supposed to keynote next month, quietly removed her from the program. Saturday morning, the final nail. The Securities and Exchange Commission announced they were opening an investigation into Aurora Media for potential securities fraud related to false statements made to investors. My phone rang, unknown number, but I recognized the area code Palo Alto. Ms. Kane, this is Jennifer Walsh from Andreessen Horowitz. We've been following the Aurora situation. We're launching a new streaming platform, and we need someone with your expertise. Can we talk about you building something with your name actually on it this time? I smiled, looking at my laptop where my resignation letter to Aurora was already typed and ready to send. Yes, I said. Let's talk. I never responded to the media requests, not the Times, not the Journal, not the dozen tech podcasts that wanted my side of the story. They already had the story. It was written in 37,000 lines of code, documented in Git commits, and sealed in legal agreements. My silence said more than any interview could. 3 weeks after Aurora's implosion, I was sitting in a WeWork space in Palo Alto, building something new. No corporate hierarchy, no creative directors who couldn't create, no CEOs more interested in their wives' egos than their company's integrity. Just me, my laptop, and code that would always have my name on it. Nora texted me updates occasionally. Graham had been removed as CEO by unanimous board vote. The company was being restructured under emergency leadership. They'd managed to launch a stripped-down version of the platform 2 months later. But without the core distribution logic, my logic, it was just another streaming service in an ocean of streaming services. The $82 million valuation became a case study in Harvard Business Review titled, "When Nepotism Meets Technology, the Aurora Collapse." Marissa Hale became a ghost. Her name was poison in Silicon Valley. The woman who'd stood on stage in her silver designer dress, claiming to have revolutionized digital media, couldn't get a meeting with a startup, let alone a position. Someone told me she'd moved to Austin, trying to rebrand as a life coach for executive wives. Even that failed when potential clients Googled her name. I ran into Marcus 6 months later at a conference in San Francisco. He looked older, tired, wearing the exhaustion of someone who'd survived a corporate disaster. "Emma," he said, holding a beer at the networking event. "For what it's worth, I should have said something earlier, when I saw what was happening." "You knew the whole time," I said. It wasn't a question. "I knew, but I was a coward. I thought keeping my head down would protect me." "How'd that work out?" He laughed bitterly. "I'm freelancing now. Aurora's reputation is so toxic that having CTO of Aurora on my resume is actually worse than a gap." We stood in silence for a moment, watching young engineers network with the desperate energy of people who didn't yet know how brutal the industry could be. "You know what the funny thing is," Marcus said. Marissa actually believed she deserved credit. Graham had convinced her that having the vision was the same as doing the work. She genuinely thought that picking purple gradients for the presentation made her an innovator. "That's not funny," I said. "That's pathetic." "Yeah," he agreed. "It is." A year later, my new company sold to Apple for $40 million. It was a smaller exit than Aurora's supposed valuation, but every dollar was real, built on actual innovation, with proper attribution. My name was on the patents, the press releases, and the check. The day the sale was announced, I received one final email from Graham Hale. No corporate account this time, just his personal Gmail. "Emma, congratulations on the exit. You deserved everything you achieved. I wanted you to know that I understand now what we took from you, what I let happen, what I encouraged. There's no excuse, only regret. I'm sorry." I read it twice, then archived it without responding. Some messages don't deserve answers. Some apologies come too late. and some people need to live with the silence they created. The tech world has a short memory for some things and a long memory for others. New scandals replaced Aurora. New founders made new mistakes, but in certain circles, pulling a Marissa became shorthand for claiming credit you didn't earn, and Clause 6.4b, it became known as the Emma Kane Clause in Silicon Valley, added to contracts across the industry. I still code, every day, late into the night sometimes, building things that matter, things that work, things that have my actual name on them, not because I need the recognition anymore, but because creation is what I do. It's who I am. It's what they tried to steal but never could. They thought I'd stay silent. They thought I'd disappear. Instead, I wrote my name into the very architecture of their dreams and watched them crumble when they tried to erase it. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just refusing to let someone steal your silence along with your work. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, "Authorization not granted." Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and justice served cold. I'm curious. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what country or city you're in. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. If you enjoyed this story of how one engineer brought down an $82 million empire with nothing but patience and paperwork, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Have you ever had someone try to steal credit for your work? How did you handle it? Let's discuss in the comments.